Hello and welcome to the Federal. I am S. Srinivasan. An informal meeting of the UN Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee, CTC, was held at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai on Friday. This was followed by a formal meeting of the committee in Delhi on Saturday. The issue of new and emerging technologies used by terrorists was the main focus of the two-day meet. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar targeted Pakistan for protecting the planners of the 2008 Mumbai attacks and criticized China for blocking the listing of terrorists at the UN. He, of course, did not name the two countries. And interestingly, the Chinese representative was present at the meetings. Now, India's stand received support from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who joined through a video conference, and said all countries are responsible for bringing the perpetrators of carnage in Mumbai to justice. He added, no nation should stand in the way of joint India-US proposals to designate terrorists at the UN Security Council. Now, to give a little background, on 28 November 2008, 10 Pakistani terrorists created mayhem in Mumbai for 3 days, killing more than 170 people. To understand further the importance of the meeting, I have with me Ambassador Ganapathy, former Indian Foreign Service officer, who held several distinguished positions before he retired as Secretary West. I'm also joined by my colleague, K. Dakshinamurthy, who closely follows foreign affairs. Welcome, Ambassador Ganapathy.
Good morning, Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you for having me over.
Ambassador, on Friday, 4 survivors from 2 terror attacks of 26/11 and also 2016 Brussels bombings spoke at the special meeting of the UN's Counter-Terrorism Committee. They recounted the horrors they faced and clearly set the mood of the meeting. And, as we know, the anniversary of the 26/11 attacks is only a few weeks away, but it's been 14 years. And though we know who the key conspirators behind the attack, none of them have been punished. In fact, we're still struggling to designate terrorists. Now, so what do you make of this? What is the significance of this meeting?
Mr. Srinivasan, I think you have rightly brought the issue into perspective. What we should, of course, look at is the battle against terrorism is an ongoing process. And terrorism and its manifestation is the biggest menace which humanity today faces. Now, the meeting which was held day before in Mumbai and yesterday in Delhi was symbolic, many would say, but it was an effort to underline the resolve of the international community that terrorism is an issue which is not going to go away, and the international community is equally resolved to counter it with all the strength at its command. Now, to give a bit of a background, of course, the Counter-Terrorism Committee, which organized this meeting, was set up in September 2001 after the September 11 US New York Trade Center bombings.
Yeah.
And the Counter-Terrorism Committee, or the CTC, is fully charged with looking into various threats which emanate from terrorism and the various steps which the international community should take. And of course, it is a part of the UN Security Council. So the 15 member states of the UN Security Council obviously were involved in the meeting in Mumbai. Many would say, would the UN Security Council host such meetings outside of its headquarters in New York? The Charter, of course, provides for this. Article 28.3 does provide for the Security Council to hold meetings outside New York as and when called for, with the approval and concurrence of the members of the council. And that's how this meeting took place. Previously also, there have been 4 or 5 meetings. Of course, most of them were related to local issues, be it Africa or Middle East or wherever. This was the first time when such a meeting was being held in India. And the significance of it was that India is among the most seriously affected countries by the menace of terrorism. Many would say, of course, why now and why? And as you rightly said, it's been 14 years since the dastardly attack in Mumbai in that November of 2008. Of course, what does this happen is, terrorists have also upgraded their skills. And the focus of this particular meeting was countering the use of new and emerging technologies by terrorists. And it had three uh, agenda items. One was countering the use of ICT and emerging technologies, then use of the fundraising, and the third and final one was the misuse of unmanned aerial systems. Now, if you look at each of these three, they have their benefits, of course. First, when you take the emerging and new ICT and new technologies, social media is a very positive thing. But when this is misused, like it happened not long ago in India itself, the question of employment, or a couple of years ago when the Assam issue was misused or propagated in the wrong direction, there were issues. Similarly, on fundraising, very good because we are all able to use internet banking and other things. But when such things happen for terrorism, you don't even know how these funds are moving. And UAS, the unmanned aerial systems, drones, we have seen drones coming from across our northwestern border, and which affects our border states. So when you look at this, the meeting becomes all the more relevant as we enter the middle of the second decade of the 21st century, where new and emerging technologies, new discoveries have been made towards making life easy for the general public, but it makes also easier for terrorists to carry out their inimical activities. Now, going on the agenda of the meeting, what was significant was, as you rightly said, we had Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking. There was a message from Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. EAM, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar, kicked off the meeting. Then we had three foreign ministers, of course, the UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, the Foreign Minister of Gabon, who is the President of the UN Security Council this month, and we also had the Foreign Minister of Ghana, besides the Deputy Foreign Minister of Albania and the Deputy Foreign Minister of the United Emirates. From an Indian perspective, this meeting is significant because we are in the Security Council only up to December 2022, as you're aware. Our two-year term ends now. And this two-year term has been very rich with activities right from the day we joined in January 2021. And we had two very significant events on a global scale. One was Afghanistan, August 15, 2021. And we had Ukraine, where the Indian permanent representative, the Indian mission and Delhi were actively associated in looking at how to eradicate the threats to peace and security from these actions. So that was very, very important. Of course, we had a 35-paragraph resolution yesterday, as you are aware. The resolution after the meeting, Delhi Declaration, as it is called, significant. A lot of people will say it's just nothing but rehash of what has been happening in all these UN Security Council resolutions, the UNSCRs. But it's not so, because what we really need to look at is, if you don't reiterate what those earlier resolutions called for, it is a forgotten thing. And there's no point in bringing in new if you forget the old, because the old is as good as relevant today as it was in, say, 2001 or 1999, when the 1267 Sanctions Committee was set up. So obviously 1267, 1373, and all those become relevant. So I think all the previous resolutions brought in and brought up to date to underscore the point that the international community will have zero tolerance towards terrorism, because that is the buzzword and we should not forget. And of course, bringing these three particular agenda issues, the ICT and emerging technologies, funds, and US into play. Now, EAM, Dr. Jaishankar, as you rightly said, also spoke of the double speak or double standards of certain countries. Of course, he didn't name them, but I have no hesitation in saying he was referring to Pakistan and China, because Pakistan, regrettably, was born on the same day as us. But when we went towards democracy and nation building, they have today gone into and sunk into the cesspool of terrorism. And it's the epicenter of global terrorism, where all these terrorists have come, towards India, Afghanistan, and maybe others. And what they call as the all-weather friend of Pakistan, China, has been supporting them. As you are aware, in this year itself, between, China has withheld support for 5 terrorists being designated by the UN Security Council, including Sajid Mir, who was actively associated with the November 2018 November 2008, Mumbai terrorist attacks. Then you had the brother of Hafiz, the son of Hafiz Saeed, Tala Saeed. You had Sajid Mir, you had Shahid Mahmood, you had Abdul Rauf Azhar Mahmood's brother. And, so those terrorists are roaming free. They have been not brought to justice. They have been supported, and they're going unpunished. So I think this double standard was what was called for. Of course, Foreign Minister Jaishankar in his speech also underlined 5 action points, which have been reflected again in the declaration but underlining the point of zero tolerance. And of course, these points were also reflected in the 8-point mentioned by Dr. Jaishankar in January of 2021.
Yeah.
So all in all, I think I would put it this way. The meeting was important from India point of view, because the first time we are having a meeting at this level in India from the UN Security Council. Important because India is in the UN Security Council till December. And all this will be reflected in the month of December 2022, when India will take the presidency of the UN Security Council before it demits charge on 31st December 2022.
Okay, thank you. I think you have led the grounds, and I do agree with you that it's not an easy process. It's going to take a lot of time. But I'll now pose this question to Dakshin. It may sound a bit repetitive, but then, I mean, as journalists, we need to keep highlighting this issue as well. Blinken said allowing the architects of the Mumbai attacks to go unpunished will send a message to terrorists around the world that their crimes will be tolerated. That's the kind of a message. So the action isn't, there's a lot of talk, but no action. Even the US Secretary of State knows that, these are just, but he's still talking. In the case of US, they could take a decisive action, but there seems to be some duplicity in what US says, and it does when it comes to, say, kind of developing countries such as India.
Good morning, Srini and Ganpati. You have really hit the nail on the head, because seriously, we are talking of UN Security Council with a lot of loopholes in them. It's not a even game. There is a lot of controlling that is happening by the 5 permanent powers. In fact, if China is able to dictate the narrative of what happened to the terrorists in the 2008 attack, it's simply because they have the veto power, and we can never get away from this fact. So whatever is said in meetings like these, they are very limited in nature, and they are in some ways, one can't doubt the intentions. Probably the intentions are, it's good. There is a real concern in the world about the rise in terrorism. And there are certain countries, including India, which are affected by this. So on the face of it, looking at these kind of declarations, they just add to the existing discourse on how to combat this. But the real problem is that within the Security Council, the 5 member states have misused, the 5 permanent members have misused their position, like including the US. The US, for instance, went to war, invaded Iraq without permission from the UN Security Council. Even today, that's a huge discussion and a controversy. As far as Russia is concerned, it is simply not allowing any discussion on the Ukraine war and why it invaded Ukraine in the first place. So these are larger issues, of course. And when it comes to terrorism, unfortunately, terrorism is also a matter of interpretation. In fact, if you go back into records, you will find that pre-2001, the US never called, say, the groups in Kashmir as terrorists. They, in fact, never used that word terrorists. In fact, they woke up to terrorism as terrorism only when they were attacked, on 9/11. So it is a challenge. It's a challenge in a real sense, because there are also structural limitations, within the UN. And I mean, frankly, there's though there is a reform going on, supposedly going on to increase the number of members, permanent members, these things are really not happening. And unless reforms don't happen, we can't expect much other than declarations and statements of good intent, like what we saw in Delhi yesterday.
Yeah. I really respect a lot of foreign officers like Mr. Ganapati and others, who have a very tough job, because, perhaps they have to invent new words every time, and, but keep pursuing it, keep pursuing for years together. But yesterday there is one more issue which came up in yesterday's declaration, which is interesting. The Delhi Declaration mentioned human rights 8 times and fundamental freedoms twice. The delegates seem to be cautioning that tools meant for fight against terror should be deployed with care. It should not turn against ordinary citizens. Ambassador Ganapathy, how do you look at this issue in Indian context?
First of all, I think the reflection of these 2 points which you mentioned is nothing new. It's not as if it has come for the first time in the Delhi Declaration. If you look at even earlier resolutions, of course, the question of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms has been reflected one way or the other. I think that is not a point worthy of a point which is under discussion from a global point of view. From an Indian perspective, of course, I think, let's put it this way. The terrorism which takes place against India emanates from outside its borders. And are we able to take any concrete, decisive action in terms of going to the areas where the terrorism comes from? Is a question. Of course, Mr. Dakshinamurthy just mentioned the US action against Afghanistan in 2001. Iraq also, perhaps, he mentioned. These are all relevant issues. We have a different issue. See, the question is, US is a permanent member of the Security Council. And as you rightly said, I think I always maintain that unless there's a reform of the UN Security Council, none of the non-permanent members and the other members of the UN Assembly itself, the membership of the UN is going to be justified in whatever the Security Council resolutions come up, because the veto-yielding countries immediately come up with a veto. So I think the best way to overcome any difficulties which might arise, like in the case of designating these terrorists, is to have permanent members on our side. Of course, I should mention one small issue here in the 1267 committee of the UN Security Council. The veto only comes in later when the vote comes in. So before that, designation requires a consensus. And that's how, I think you can always call for a vote to call out the member who is withholding, because when you have a vote, you have to give an explanation if you vote against, and you would not have a rational argument. Whereas putting on hold is just a sort of it say, okay, I'm not ready. There are some technical issues I need to go through. So I think, again, the entire structure of the United Nations today is a very anachronistic existence compared to what it was in 1945. And the 21st century sees a different context altogether, because the victorious powers, the 5 victorious powers, of them, only perhaps 2 today are fairly strong enough economically and militarily. Russia is having its own trouble. The UK and France, I don't think you can compare them to what they were in 1945. Even 1945, I mean, with France and UK got it because it had colonies, France, again, colonies. But I think these are certain issues, certain hypocritical statements which come into play. So going back to the question you asked me, I think human rights and fundamental freedom have been reflected even earlier. It's nothing new, because every country is aware that if you give a free hand to any other country, except of course, you can't stop the US or Russia from taking any action, or even China for that matter. It threatens, keeps on threatening China, Taiwan, and it threatens India. It's been coming into our territory whenever it wants. So I think, if you give a free hand to many other countries, maybe in some parts of the world, there could be very serious violations of international law. In an Indian context, I have nothing to worry about it, because our human rights issues, people will talk about it, but I don't think we are second to anybody in terms of respecting those things. And our courts are very, very strong. Any action which the state takes, high courts or the Supreme Court is the final arbiter in any of these cases. And it has come out with flying colors, let's put it this way, not only within India, but also globally.
Right. Dakshin, quickly on this issue, there are 2 aspects to it. One is of course, these are, in a way, you can call as dual-use technologies. Even as the agencies try to catch up with technology, so are the terrorists. There is one challenge that. And the second challenge is that how do you ensure that legitimate freedom voices also don't get hurt by this? What is your point of view on this?
I would say it's the statement is very good. The declaration is very good that you can't trample upon human rights in the while fighting terrorism. But in practice, I think it's very difficult. And even if it's not very difficult, governments have shown no particular inclination to really respect human rights. We have, of course, an example in Guantanamo Bay, where the US, I'm talking about US because they are the ones who really push all these, in terms of resolutions. And in Guantanamo Bay, even today, is not, they can't defend Guantanamo Bay. On what basis, while trying to control terrorism, they managed to find an enclave where no law works. It's the US law doesn't work. The world's laws don't work. So they do whatever they want. So it's not an easy thing, Srini, because the intention may be great, but you never know, because for instance, there is a practical problem. When you go into an area where a blast has happened, it's very difficult to really identify who are the people behind the blast, because they're not wearing a uniform. They can't be identified. They merge with the population. So it is a tough task for the security force to actually go and find, what's happening. If it's, if you look at it from a conventional point of view, suppose you go by technology, where, there is a mention in the resolution saying that privacy should be respected. But the privacy, where do you draw the line between privacy and monitoring? When you monitor, you may also trample upon privacy. So these are really very, very ticklish questions, and it's okay to make a statement, but in practice, I think it's extremely difficult to implement these.
Right. Ambassador, the 2021 declaration, I just happened to see, as you say that, these declarations made reiteration of previous commitments. They also look at it. So it did that. And, it claimed that a lot of progress have been made in last 20 years. I'm talking about 2021 resolution, which talked of since the CTC was set up, there were a lot of progress. But, when you look at Indian, particularly 2611, any resolution against Pakistan gets blocked by China, as you yourself referred. So the veto powers of P5, as you also said, seem to be, that's one big hurdle. And you also spoke of reforms, and there have been a lot of talks about, can there be any possibility of reforms in the UN? In the light of what is also happening in Ukraine, and isn't now time ripe? There are a lot of neutral nations where they could get together and try to push some kind of thing on these kind of reforms, at least P5, that they need to reform. Is the time ripe? Yeah.
What has been happening, Mr. Srinivasan, is that the question of UN reforms has been taken up for quite some time. The last reforms was in the mid-60s, when the number of non-permanent members was increased. The number of permanent members has never changed, if you recall, from 1945, literally. The only change which took place was in 1971 October, when the Republic of China was literally shown the door, and the People's Republic of China took its place at the high table. Now, what has been happening is it's not gone, what they call in the UN context is, it's not come to a text-based resolution yet. It's all been discussed, debated, and there have been various issues which have also come up into question, in the sense that who will be the additional members if there is a expansion in the UN Security Council. I mean, the strongest, of course, are India, Germany, Japan, and we have this four, which have been talking of it. Brazil, we have been talking of it, but then there have been objections from other countries as to why only these and why not more. The question of veto: are the permanent members P5 ready to give up the veto? They have clearly said no. And would the new members get veto? They say no. So the permanent members would just be sitting there and seeing the major share of the cake of the UN Security Council going to the P5, the current P5. But I think realistically speaking, as we said, when in 1945, the UN membership was not even 50. Today, it is 193. So obviously, when you have a quadrupling of the UN membership, the Security Council should obviously also take adequate steps towards reform. And while you can push this through the UN General Assembly, will the Security Council members, the permanent members, agree to whatever comes up? So I think the discussions haven't yet come up. It's not yet ripe to come on the General Assembly. But first of all, I think most important is they should have what they call as a text-based resolution for discussion, debate, and then for moving, adoption, and then finally to bring it to the Security Council. And that's where I think it will be very, very crucial. Now, talking of these 4 members, I think Japan, China has been very strongly against Japan. India has had the support of Russia, and now Russia and France initially, and now Russia, France, UK, and US very strongly. China talks of reforms, has on certain days objected to India's membership, but then they waffle. So I think it depends on the melting of the ice in the Himalayas, which perhaps determine support of China's support for India's membership. Similarly, Germany, there are issues there. You have problems in Africa because would you need 2 African members or more? They have the declaration there, which talks of 2 of South, whether it will be 2, it will be South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, or Ethiopia, or whatever. In Asia, Indonesia also wants to pitch in. You have Argentina in Latin America, Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil. So I think these are issues. And then not to mention the coffee group. You have the coffee group, which brings in Turkey and many others, which do not support many of the key contenders, which have perhaps a pan membership support. So I think while reform is very, very important, I doubt whether we would see it in the, say, before the 100th anniversary of India's independence. If it does, it'll be a great thing. But as they say, you yourself used it in the terrorism context. I think any of these things which doesn't go full way, you need to doggedly pursue towards acquiring that, be it membership or countering terrorism or many others. Of course, the very key thing which will take place, as you know, from next month is we will take over the G20 membership presidency for the next 1 year, which is going to be very, very important. And we may perhaps, because the subject of today's discussion, which we are having with you, I think funding, financial issues will be key. And in financial issues, these also issues will be brought into play. So I think, yes, we need reforms. We need solid actions against the terrorism menace. But we need to pursue, because a lot of progress has been made, as you said, the FATF and many others have been moving on. In fact, when Pakistan was brought under the grey list of the FATF, the risk appreciation method, I think you saw a lot of, they took in certain people into custody. Now they are out of it. They may allow them to go around and freely move. So I think reform, yes, but will take time. The menace of terrorism can be brought down, but the terrorists are always one step ahead. So we need to have greater cooperation between the law enforcement agencies and the members of the Security Council. And we have to look at other issues also which confront the global community, sustainable development goals and many others also.
Right. Thank you very much. I take it as a concluding remark. In a way, you have summed up the whole thing. Dakshin, you want to say quickly something?
No. The only point I thought worth mentioning was what the same meeting that happened in Bombay and Delhi. If the same meeting had happened in New York, would it have made a difference other than the fact that it was held in Bombay? Well, it is, of course, a very symbolic meeting in that sense, because I'm sure the declaration wouldn't have been very different. But the fact that it happened in Bombay, in the place where the attacks happened, was symbolic. Probably whatever India can do, it's trying to do. But let's hope that things change for the better. That's all.
Yeah, I do think that it's an important thing that in the same hotel where actually this terror attack happened, to hold such a meeting and, presence of all the representatives, including that of China, it does convey a message, so the progress could be slow, but then nonetheless, it's a progress. I take it positively, and I would like to conclude because this is an ongoing subject and we would like to meet again on this. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Dakshin.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more interesting updates.